my topic concerning the local studies in contemporary Moscow, and I will discuss the case of Забытые моряки project. So, local studies haven't been sufficiently researched in the context of social movements and grassroots forms of social memory. This topic was most strongly emphasized in the much discussed project «Какое прошлое нужно будущему России?» What past does Russia's future need? Where the local studies were considered as an alternative form of social memory, and alternative to official one. In the Moscow context, there is also a certain gap. Studies of Moscow preservation initiatives mainly examine the organizational evolution of these movements and hardly touch upon the cultural aspects of their work. On the other hand, folklorists are engaged in researching the circulation of the so-called Moscow text. For example, I can mention the project Historical Memory of Cities, Историческая память городов. However, from this perspective, local studies are reduced to local historians, so I am address the perspective of public history, first of all. Then I consider local studies in the context of development of urban culture, and in particular an issue of urban heritage, more precisely the connection between the city and the heritage. This means taking into account cultural policy, and more specifically the interaction between authorized and unauthorized discourses on heritage. Moreover, I would like to correlate the citywide and local levels of the functioning of local studies. Among the literature that can be relied upon, I would like to point out, first of all, the works of Pavel Kupriyanov devoted to local projects and local initiatives in Moscow. I will begin with a brief overview of the development of Moscow local studies at the city and district levels, and then move to an analysis of the case of the forgotten sailors. The development of local studies in Moscow fits into the urban reform announced by Sergei Sobyanin. In the 1990s and 2000s, the development of local studies was largely linked to the development of the internet. The mainstream here can be considered the formation of the city preservation and heritage preservation initiatives, Arknadzor, and the emergence of number of excursion projects, Москва, которой нет, Moscow, which isn't exists, among others. The development of these movements was a part of growing contradiction within the urban policy of former Moscow mayor Yuri Lushkov, and their actions played an important role in his removal from office. The new local studies, новое краеведение, reflects the growth of neoliberal trends. The use of the term neoliberal is debatable, and from today's perspective, the word liberal characterizes the transformation of state policy and the new regime of the urban subjectivity production. However, the consumer quality of the urban life in Moscow has increased during the period of during Sobyanin's period. It can be said that development of local studies correlates with the aestheticization of politics described by Daniela Zupin and Miran Baden-Bender. in their papers, this paper devoted to the liberal state of Moscow policy. The development of urban themes associated with interests in public spaces, and it was also important for new local history. The reform of cultural institutions designed to open them up to the city and to intensify interaction with urban audiences became fertile ground for this. This is where the active inclusion of local studies themes in the cultural agenda takes place. Changes in media infrastructure, the emergence of social media, YouTube, Facebook, Vkontakte, and later Telegram, and updates to the media tools used for conducting excursions brought new figures brought new figures in this field and in the forefront. Here on this slide you can see the main trends in the urban development of the urban culture in Moscow in 2010s. And then, so the new figures who symbolized this новое краеведение or new local studies. Not all of them were new. For example, Sergei Nikitin-Rimsky was one of the founders of the excursion movement in 1990s. But these persons managed to successfully adapt to the new conditions in urban culture. Even though at the beginning of Sobyanin mayoral term, urban movements and particular preservationists were at their peak and managed to achieve certain success. But further development was not an upward trend. If we distract ourselves from the question of intensity of urban movements, we can point to some characteristic trends here. The first of the strengths is related to political context and repertoire of grassroots movements, which Lilia Voronkova and Oleg Pachenkov described as new urban activism. So here you can see the the description of this phenomenon. And in parallel with this, we can see that this new urban activism in this definition, we can see that the new urban activism is in the contrast to the former practices of preservationists, and that authors of this definition describes it as a method of the adding meaning and not of protecting something or putting themselves in the situation of conflict. In parallel with this, one can note how the focus of local historians is changing. Local history in early periods was largely associated with classical landmarks on the one hand, and on the other hand obvious artistic historical and cultural value. I can describe it as the annals of losses. For example, the red book or black book, which were made by Arknadzor, is examples of such type of heritage discourse. The new local studies have a significant social emphasis. Social issues related to private life, everyday life, and so on are beginning to play an increasingly important role. When it comes to the urban environment, there has been a significant expansion in the range of objects of interest, with the two areas becoming particularly important. On the one hand, difficult heritage and counter monuments became the focus of interest. The most striking example here is the Memorial Society это прямо здесь, it's right here project. And on the other hand, interest in Soviet and post-Soviet heritage raised, which can be called краеведение окраин or local studies of the periphery, because this heritage is predominantly in the periphery, in the urban periphery. I can give some examples. For example, one of the excursionists, Denis Ramodin, said that his favorite excursion is dedicated to the P3 series. P3 is a series of the building which were created in panel building which were created in 1970s, and other authors of such project, Pavel Gnilorybov, proclaimed the motto that all heritage is valuable, and particularly the Soviet and post-Soviet heritage. These objects don't require protection and preservation in the traditional sense, and are not become the project of authorized, mostly are not become the project of authorized heritage discourse. As a part of the project Москва без окраин, Moscow without outskirts, and лаборатория двороведения, Country Yard Studies Laboratory, supported by Moscow Museum, the history of Moscow districts are being created with the participation of local residents. These processes create conditions not only for the existence of urban projects, for citywide projects, which acquiring also, some of them acquiring also a federal scale, but also for the development of the local history at the district level. In the 2000s, this process was relatively weak, and the Tsaritsына case is here is of interest. Along with the club of local historians and old-timers, independent internet projects emerge here, and these projects were not directly related to the reconstruction of the museum reserve that took place in 2000s. Among this new project, there are, first of all, Sergei Chusov's website dedicated to the history of settlements, ancient settlements on this territory. And on the other hand, a website and book by Pavel Alexander Smyslovy dedicated to the genealogical research, also on this territory. In the 2010s, a number of projects and institutions in the Moscow districts emerged, and they began to develop the local studies in a new way. Here you can see the examples of these institutions. Among them are the Basmanny District Museum, Avant-Garde Center, and the Belyaevo Identity Center, which are associated with local libraries and galleries. There are also a number of informal projects. However, gradually the general authoritarian context of political life in contemporary Russia is also affected by sclerotization of municipal life. As a result, even the forms of new urban activism that gravitate toward political compromise, which could nourish the development of local studies interests on the ground, are essentially paralyzed. The decentralization of local studies knowledge is developing rather poorly and is largely ethereal. While walks in peripheral districts led by residents are quite common, the organization of neighborhood museums, despite the intensified discussion of this topic, has so far hardly developed. Here I'm moving to my case, and I would like to discuss the project Забытые моряки, which emerged in the which represents the new wave of local studies, local history initiatives, and is developed largely outside the established infrastructure of local studies support in Moscow. It emerged in the semi-peripheral Moscow district of Nagatina. Nagatina is administratively comprises two districts, Nagatina-Sadovniki and Nagatinsky Zaton, is in the southeast of Moscow on peninsula encircled by the Moscow River. Significant objects associated with this district are, on the one hand, the former Tsar's residence, the Kolomenskaya Estate Museum. On the other hand, the key object of here is of Moscow is the object of Moscow water infrastructure, the Perervinsky hydroelectric power station, which was built by the Gulag prisoners during the creation of the Moscow Canal. And it's also located right here. In the 2010s, the district became the place of active construction and redevelopment of the territory of the of the former ZIL plant, which is only near here. The Artel, this is some information on the Moscow Canal and its construction in the 1930s. The Artel Забытые моряки, Forgotten Sailors, established in 2016 on the initiatives of Andrei Dvornikov, who is on the photo on the right. This Artel became a truly active agent of Nagatina local studies. In 2016, Dvornikov created a channel on the same name on the YouTube platform. And in 2017, a Facebook community Nika, it's abbreviation for Nagatinsky и Коломенские артефакты. Nagatina and Kolomenskaya artifacts. The latter aimed to unite citizens interested in developing the history of the district. The key topic for Dvornikov was the construction of the canal by Dmitlag prisoners. By this time, the theme of Dmitlag had already been developed for several years. Most thoroughly, this work was conducted as a part of local history project on the Moscow-Volga Canal, founded by Sergei Gaev and Igor Kuverkov and based in the town of Dolgoprudny near Moscow. In the 2016, on the eve of 80th anniversary of canal opening, a discussion on the significance of this site and the possibilities of its transformation into a heritage site began. This discussion, which was initiated by the Memorial Society, was attended by representatives of Arknadzor, Natalia Samover and Alexander Frolov, specialists in history and architecture. Representatives of church brotherhoods also played a significant role in the process of heritization of this site. The discussion in Memorial Society and following events on the topic led to the emergence of Canal of Memory project. The aim of latter was to create the capital first cultural and historical landscape of its kind, which works an educational moment to the tragic legacy of the 20th century and contributes to the value of self-determination of modern citizens. Unlike the Moscow-Volga Canal in Долгопрудный project, the new initiative focused more on the memorial work. Its participants organized exhibitions, discussions and excursions, as well as the annual memorial event, the Memory Board. Since the canal was unique both in the architectural and hydraulic engineering sense, and its creation cost a tremendous number of human lives, initiatives had emerged to give it a patrimonial status. As Natalia Samover points out, in 2016, as a part of implementation of state cultural policy strategy, a nomination of the canal for inclusion in the World Heritage list was being prepared. However, this idea was never implemented. While the participants of the project mentioned above worked with the history of the canal in general and focused on the areas lying mainly outside of Moscow, Dvornikov and his companions turned to the development of the study of the canal related to the coastal territories, islands, and hydraulic structures located in Nagatina district. In this work, Nagatina local historians like the Saritsina counterparts relied primarily on their efforts and horizontal links with participants in the Moscow-Volga project and other local history communities, such as, for example, Museum of the Avant-Garde, Gallery of Shabulovka, Gallery of Kashirka, among others. We don't see the cooperation, for example, with Arknadzor and even less with any grant programs. Despite the lack of financial supports, the work has brought quite impressive results. In 2019, Dvornikov organized the exhibition Lost History, Забытая история, the great constructions through the prism of an old Moscow neighborhood in the local gallery on Kashirka. The artifacts and materials collected at the exhibition later formed the basis of the permanent exhibition River of Time, Река времени, which was created at the gallery, at the same gallery on Kashirka in 2023. Also in 2019, Dvornikov and his companions also organized a street exhibition, which became the subject of a conflict with the local authorities. The latter tried not only to appropriate the collected materials, but also to rewrite the history of forced labor in the Dmitlak into pious story about the glorious construction project that united the people and the regime. In 2022, Dvornikov initiated the installation of a memorial cross, first an ice cross and then a wooden one, dedicated to the martyrs of Dmitlak. This cross was dismantled immediately after installation at the command of the local authorities, and the initiator of the installation was briefly arrested. But the main contribution of the Forgotten Sailors was a series of documentaries which they published on YouTube and on other platforms, again using funds of their own. Three of these series, Коломенские узники, Коломенские prisoners, Nagatina Isles, Nagatinskие острова, and River of Time, was mainly devoted to the history of the construction of the canal. The plots of the films of Another Circle, Destruction of Kolomenskaya, were in one way or another connected with the problems of preserving nearby heritage sites, Kolomenskaya, Simonov Monastery, and others. In recent years, the Artel has been making not only films on neighborhood history, but also critically responding to the transformations that are being implemented on the territory of the district on the instructions of the Moscow authorities, the development of apartment complexes, destructions of garages, constructions of new transport arteries, and so on. The films are made quite professionally. The filmmakers use various shooting and editing techniques, combining footage and stage episodes. Alexey Izosimov, a member of the Artel, professional actor and stuntman, plays the role of narrator, but sometimes expert commentaries, example given Igor Kuverkov and Sergei Gaev from the Moscow Volga project, are also included. The narrative of the films is emphatically local. Like most streamers, the filmmakers used on-the-spot narration, the K technique. The storytelling of the neighborhood often includes references to the different stages of narrator's biography with the neighborhood and to the stories heard from the other residents, which aim to produce identification with the local community. The significance of the local belonging is also fundamental for the assessment of the Moscow authorities' activities. It's indicative that the film authors are more sympathetic for the Moscowite Yuri Lushkov than to Sobyanin and his team, who are repeatedly criticized for their non-Moscow origin. Turning to the subject of Dmitlak and other events of the 20th century, the authors emphasize the recent history is much less well known to us than the events of earlier periods. Unlike the works of Tsaritsyn local historians, Andrei Dvornikov films and articles don't address the ancient history of the place, but emphasize the connection between the development of the settlement and events of Soviet history. They rely in the narration on the detective model of discovering so-called hidden history, characteristic of local studies discourse at all. Sometimes it seems similar to books like Mystic Moscow, Mysteries and Secrets of Moscow, and so on. In the frame of hiding history and destroying memory, the films also present the current improvement of the district and the city. The actions of participants in the films are often manifestation of Moscow authorities. In the films are often presents as a manifestation of some metaphysical forces. Thus, the metaphor of mycelium gradually penetrating the entire territory of the city is a cross-cutting line in the series so-called zlые корчи, evil crusts. The use of such strong metaphors is also characteristic, for example, Island of Dreams, Park of Wonders, and or a cancerous tumor of Moscow in the anteroom of hell. All this creates an ominous Gothic macabre atmosphere, which is characteristic of Добытые моряки film production. Describing the city-forming significance of the tragic episodes in the history of Nagatina and neighboring settlements, the authors of the films seek to indicate the genealogy of contemporary conflicts. The forced eviction and destruction of village building in the territories adjacent to the Kolomenskaya Museum echoes the current development of the district. Discussion of the establishment in Nagatina, the Central Research Institute of Chemistry and Mechanics, and other institutes and chemical enterprises subordinate to the NKVD and other secret services, which continued to hurt the ecological situation and growth of cancer in its inhabitants. Thus, the authors find themselves in opposition to most of the actors operating in the neighborhood, from the Moscow and local authorities to the museum and its staff. Symptomatically, they link their work to the figure of one of the most defenders of Soviet-era heritage, Pyotr Baranovsky, who is, as I understand, the hero of the next presentation by Alexey Izosimov, one of the founders, particularly one of the founders of the Kolomensky Museum. Due to the thematic priorities of the filmmakers, these stories cannot be built on showing landmarks in the traditional sense, although they may be present in the film. It's predominantly places that are not aesthetically pleasing or have clear evidence of the presence of the past. Quite often, visiting certain places involves crossing borders drawn by the institutions in charge of this or that territory, conflicts with the representatives of security structures. Because of this, the films often look like an urban exploration involving visits to closed and abandoned areas. In this regard, one of the important themes for the filmmakers are the restrictions and prohibitions associated with the activities of the special services, as well as stigmatization of any form of informal activity as paid for or aimed to destroying order and initiated by enemy of the so-called enemy of the state. Being a local project, the films of Забытые моряки have a considerable resonance. The number of views of certain films on YouTube fluctuates between the 3,000 and 50,000, with a higher number for film related to the Gulag. This work is also visible in the landscape of urban local studies. Dvornikov serves as an expert not only in local newspapers, but also in central publication and on TV. He cooperates with the city bloggers as well. Perhaps the most notable result of such cooperation was the famous urban blogger Ilya Varlamov's stream dedicated to Nagatina, where Dvornikov participated as an expert. So I'm going to the conclusions of my paper. The NICA project and the products of Забытые моряки, their films, represent a rare and yet notable phenomenon in the landscape of contemporary Moscow local studies. It's an example of an active local community that is not affiliated with any institution and nevertheless promotes the emergence of institutionalized project related to local history. The infrastructure described above, the project is not commercial and not built in the cultural management infrastructure which is described above. Unlike, for example, the Basmanny District Museum project, which is a case of the successful use of grant resources for the development of the local history. Project of Забытые моряки are based on their own activity and horizontal links with local historians from other places. In some respects, this project is closely coincides with Новое краеведение, new local studies. It relies on new media and is linked to the creation of technologically advanced media product and focuses primarily on heritage that doesn't have protected status. Unlike urban bloggers who intervene some different neighborhoods and evaluate them with the tourist gap, and as an urban experts, Забытые моряки constructs residence position. The focus of is the self-organization of the local community and the work of memory and creation of local heritage. Unlike projects focused on private life stories or genealogical projects, the approach of Забытые моряки, which was described, is devoid of nostalgia and focuses on topics related to the difficult past. By addressing this topic, the authors of films approach is something like practice of urban exploration. In this situation, the heritage is not only the memory of the memory of tragic episodes and the demonstration of the artifacts preserved the traces of the past, but also the testing of the boundaries created by regime objects that structure the everyday life of the area. By creating narratives about the history of the place, Забытые моряки link the story of the past with the identification of conflicts existing in the present, as can be seen in the series of the history of Kolomenskaya, where they begin with the creation of a museum and end with the criticism of ecological situation in the district and urban development project implemented under auspices of the Moscow authorities. In this respect, they diverge from the style of new urban activism, finding themselves in constant conflict with the authorities. The work of the Forgotten Sailors is quite controversial, and this may be seen as another point of similarity with the new local history movement. They are criticized for the fact that the stories they tell are difficult to verify. This is partly justified by the potential conflict and the formulation «опасное краеведение» here is significant and notable. There's strong emphasis on the detective intrigue and stories of mystery and conspiracy, vivid metaphors and aesthetics that bring them closer to the literature of mystical Moscow may also cause the complaints and doubts in the quality of their work. However, it's important to know that the message of the stories is directed against oblivion, mistrust, and stigmatization, which are key tools of the propaganda today. Thus, we can see in this project how the local studies and local history turns into defense of the right to the city. Thank you very much, and I'll be glad to discuss this paper.
Thank you, Boris.
Hello everyone. My name is Alexey Izosimov. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge. And first of all, thanks a lot for this kind invitation, which is a great honor and pleasure for me. And actually, this feels very special as I did my master at Sorbonne several years ago. And it's my first time being here, at least virtually, as a presenter. So yeah, it really feels special, and that's an honor, I would say. So my today's talk is called "Out of Capital: Student-Led Restoration Initiatives in Late Soviet Russia." But I'd like to begin with a short story from just a few days ago. The media outlet I work with, which is called Vlesach, recently published an article about a restoration expedition in the Kostroma region, One of the main characters in this story is the heritage activist Evgeny Susedev. He was once one of the best-known preservationists in Moscow, but the space for civic activism in the capital has narrowed dramatically. Open protest is no longer possible in Moscow, and people like Susedev have had to look for new ways to continue their work. In his case, this has meant turning to the restoration of churches in Russia's regions. Today's my paper will look at similar centrifugal dynamics from Moscow outward into the regions, but in the context of the 1960s to the 1980s. These were decades in which the Soviet state gradually tightened its control over the grassroots association that had emerged during the thaw, including those involved in heritage preservation. In my talk, I trace how civic engagement and volunteerism in the heritage sphere both expanded and became increasingly institutionalized. I will show how volunteer initiatives first appeared in Moscow, how they were gradually pushed beyond the city boundaries, and how this displacement somewhat paradoxically led to a major scaling up of the movement across the country. In this paper, I argue that the principal driver of this outward movement were thaw-era youth. Within this cohort, I suggest that students in technical fields, one of the most prestigious within the Soviet education hierarchy, played a leading role. At the same time, I will demonstrate that these young people were frequently inspired by and worked closely with elder generations who carried pre-revolutionary cultural backgrounds. My paper will focus on two key episodes of student engagement with pre-revolutionary heritage. First, the establishment of a Moscow student club called Rodina in 1965, and then the restoration campaign at the Solovetsky Monastery initiated by students of the Faculty of Physics at Moscow State University in 1967. Then I'll examine the subsequent development of restoration construction brigades, реставрационно-строительные студенческие отряды, and then supervisory brigades, шефские отряды, in the 1970s and 1980s. Mass movements that mobilized Soviet citizens, especially young male urbanites, to volunteer in heritage restoration projects during their summer vacations. The Rodina Club, which is in Russian means motherland, emerged in 1964 as one of the first, or possibly the very first, non-state, non-professional volunteer organization dedicated to heritage preservation. The establishment of the THOPIC, All-Russian Society for the Protection of Monuments, which would later play a key role in mobilizing the population to protect cultural heritage in late Soviet Russia, took place only after the launch of Rodina and was directly related to the success of these initiatives, the emergence of this club. This makes the club a pioneering grassroots experiment in engaging the public in heritage preservation. The club remained active until 1972. According to later recollections, the story of the Rodina Club began in 1964 after a group of students from the Mendeleev Institute of Chemical Technology returned from a trip to the ancient cities of Pereslavl-Zalesky, Rostov-Veliki, and Uglich. They were so inspired by what they had seen that they decided to organize a small photo exhibition and an evening event. They invited several prominent defenders of Russia's cultural heritage to speak there. As participants later remembered, the speeches electrified the audience and sparked a wave of questions. The most urgent one was, what can we do to help? One of the guests, the well-known restorer Piotr Baranovsky, already mentioned by Boris, responded by inviting the students to join him in restoring Krutitskaya Podvorye, a semi-abandoned 17th century ecclesiastical complex not far from the center of Moscow. It was on that May evening in 1964 that the students decided to create what became the Rodina Club. Piotr Baranovsky, born in 1892, passed away 1984, was an outstanding figure in Moscow post-war cultural milieu. Trained as an architect before the revolution, after 1917 he led significant restoration projects, including the soon-to-be-demolished Kazan Cathedral on Moscow Red Square and then St. George Cathedral in Yuriv-Polsky. In the 1920s, Baranovsky undertook extensive research and participated in numerous field expeditions. He was part of a professional milieu devoted to safeguarding pre-revolutionary culture and heritage. Later, one of his friends described Baranovsky as подвижник идеи бессмертия России, a devout advocate of the ideas of Russians' immortality. In 1924, he founded the Museum of Russian Architecture in Kolomynskaya. In 1947, he initiated the establishment of the Andrei Rublev Museum. Also, from 1947, he began working on the restoration of one of the Moscow's most important ecclesiastical sites, Krutitskaya Podvorye, which was soon to become the birthplace and the headquarters of a new heritage preservation movement. By the 1960s, Baranovsky was even more active as a preservationist than a restorer. According to recollections of his associates, he energetically gathered news of impending demolitions and coordinated responses to this. During this period, he also emerged as one of the most influential ideologues of the Heritage Lobby, a group of high-ranked individuals who believed that pre-revolutionary heritage should be protected and cherished for the benefit of socialist society. Combining creativity and resourcefulness with an exceptional ability to navigate the Soviet cultural bureaucracy, Baranovsky became a lasting source of inspiration within the restoration community. The growing public interest in history and the rising demand for the protection of monuments coincided with Baranovsky's passionate advocacy, impeccable reputation, and selfless dedication. His followers often describe his commitment to safeguarding Russian culture in religious terms as a vocation or a devotion, the work of a righteous person. This combination of imagination, persistence, and personal charisma allowed Baranovsky not only to save endangered sites, but also to inspire a younger generation of preservationists who increasingly came to see heritage work as a kind of moral duty. As his contemporaries later record, the fire kindled by Baranovsky at Krutitskaya Podvorye illuminated the youth of hundreds of people. Baranovsky was passionate about involving non-professionals and young people in his project. This commitment to fostering volunteer engagement would later become a defining feature of the PEIC, particularly its Moscow branch, which Baranovsky profoundly worked with. But his first experiment in mobilizing such grassroots participation was the Rodina Club, demonstrating how heritage preservation could combine professional expertise with civic initiative. One of the distinctive features of the Rodina Club was its diversity and intergenerational collaboration. While students formed the majority, members came from all walks of life and all ages. As one report described it, they were pensioners and school children, artists and physicists, teachers and workers, people so different that one could not help thinking this was a random gathering, like on a ship's deck. Alongside with non-professional volunteers, professionals also contributed their expertise on a voluntary basis. The club's membership didn't really exceed 100 people. Most of them were students, particularly from technical fields. These students were the club's main driving force. The club focused on practical engagement with heritage preservation. Members participated in auxiliary restoration work and cleanup activities at Krutitskaya Podvorye, known as Subotniki and Voskresniki, and at other churches and manor estates. They also monitored the condition of monuments across the Moscow regions. In addition to these hands-on activities, Rodina organized educational and cultural programs. Members held classes on literature, ethnography, folklore, and the history of ancient Rus. They were also active in outreach, giving lectures and concerts in factories, institutes, and various organizations, and arranging travel and exhibitions. To give a sense of scale, between May 1969 and early 1970 alone, the club organized around 150 volunteer trips and nearly 100 lecture evenings, with announcement regularly appearing in the Вечерняя Москва newspaper. Always remarkable achievements accomplished by Rodina Club in such a short time were made possible not only by unwavering enthusiasm of its participants, but also thanks to the informal board that supported its activities. It composed of Russophile intellectuals and influential heritage preservation advocates. In addition to professionals like Baranovsky and the architect Antropov, the club received backing from numerous intellectuals with pre-revolutionary backgrounds, including the writers Oleg Volkov and Leonid Leonov, the painters Pavel Korin and Alexander Korobov, as well as the sculptor Sergei Kanyonkov and the preservationist Vladislav Tidman. At the same time, the club was supported by a younger generation of Russian culture enthusiasts, whose Russophile views were often more openly nationalistic. Among them was perhaps most prominently the figure painter Ilya Glazunov, as well as Vladimir Desятников, a cultural official, art historian, and compiler of the unpublished essay collection Памятники Отечества, which documented the massive destruction of Russian architectural heritage during the Soviet period. And also the Village Prose, author of influential essays on the preservation of old Russian culture, including blackboards and icons, Vladimir Soloukhin. So Rodina was one of the first, or at least one of the best documented, heritage preservation organizations to actively involve non-professional volunteers. For a time, its work was advantageous to the authorities, as it reduced costs and accelerated restoration work in Moscow. At the same time, it resonated with a growing demand among Muscovites, particularly young students from technical university, for public participation in heritage preservation. Although the club focused on preservation as such, the authorities soon changed their policy toward grassroots student organization of this kind. But by late 1965, with the foundation of VOPIG, Old Russian Society for the Protection of Monuments, the institutional landscape began to shift. The PIC had been established as a volunteer society, though de facto it was controlled by the government. It was dedicated to the protection, study, and popularization of cultural heritage in Soviet Russia. While the creation of this state-controlled organization was in part a response to the rise of grassroots and, in some extent, semi-independent student initiatives, the establishment of VOPIC quickly undermined the autonomy of Rodina. For a time, Rodina continued to operate as a legally recognized organization, despite facing direct attacks. Over time, VOP gradually co-opted all social movements and associations working for heritage preservation beyond its own structure. From 1968, Rodina was incorporated into the Moscow branch of VOP and continued to function within its framework by only for another 4 years. Journalist Sergei Razgonov visited the Rodina Club and reflected on its role. In September 1965 article for Sovetskaya Kultura, he wrote, "Only late in the evening, and as I was leaving the club, did I realize that in this room, with the blue wallpaper, lay the origin of a great movement." And he was right. By the late 1960s, the Rodina Club, having rapidly lost its leading role in monument preservation in Moscow, it was looking for new ways to continue its work. Research led its members beyond the capital and gave rise to travel and restoration brigades, or реставрационные строительные отряды, which soon began spreading across the country. These travel and restoration brigades were actually a small subset of a broader student construction brigade system known as студенческие строительные отряды, or simply стройотряды. Normally, a stroyotrad was a semi-volunteer student group that carried out seasonal construction work, like building tractor sheds on collective farms. The restoration of historic sites, however, was a radical repurposing of this model. Through these brigades, the Rodina Club was able to extend its mission beyond Moscow. Sorry, just to check the time. Promoting heritage preservation and civic engagement while also creating a new institutional space for architectural conservation work. In 1967, a group of Rodina Club members who were also students at the Moscow State University Faculty of Physics, or FISFAK, approached the faculty Komsomol secretary, physicist Vsevolod Tverdislav, with a proposal. They proposed him to organize a restoration expedition to the Solovetsky Monastery. This monastery, fortified Russian Orthodox complex in the White Sea archipelago, founded in the 15th century, had long been a major religious, cultural, and economic center in pre-revolutionary Russia. In the 1960s, Solovki, or the Solovetsky Islands, and their monastery gained widespread attention in the Soviet press. Numerous publications highlighted either the potential as a tourist destination or the deteriorating state of the monastery historic buildings, advocating for the immediate launch of a restoration program. In 1966, the writer Yuri Kazakov, writing in Literaturная Gazeta, declared, "Solovki must be safe, for the Soviet people need history." By the mid-1960s, initial conservation work had begun. However, chronic shortages of funds, materials, and staff meant that the efforts of the museum and its restoration unit could not substantially change the situation, given the monastery's scale and the decades of neglect resulting from its use as a special prison called Slon. As a result, these passionate calls to save the monastery resonated across Soviet society, sparking public concern and inspiring dedicated young people to take part in the restoration work. In this context, Rodina Club participants and FISFAK students reached the future renowned physicist Vsevolod Tverdislav, born in 1941. He had previously visited Solovki and maintained professional ties to the region. Vsevolod graduated from the Faculty of Physics at Moscow State University in 1964, subsequently worked as a senior laboratory assistant at the faculty. At the same time, he pursued a party career, joining the party and serving as a secretary of the Komsomol cell at the Faculty of Physics. The idea put forward by the Rodina Club members found fertile ground at the Faculty of Physics. The faculty and its Komsomol organization were exceptional in their own way. Protected by the so-called atomic shield, a special status within Soviet science due to their role in developing nuclear weapons, students at the Faculty of Physics enjoyed a high degree of autonomy from ideological interference and constraints. By the 1960s, Moscow State University FISFAK had become one of the most prestigious and privileged faculties in the country. A distinctive patriotic culture had developed among its students, emphasizing scientific achievement in the service of the socialist state. While resisting dogmatism and bureaucratic control, the faculty Komsomol, of which Vsevolod Tverdislav was an active member, actively promoted with ethos and was very even willing to challenge criticism from party officials and conservative scientists. Even after Vsevolod Tverdislav and the Komsomol endorsed the Rodina Club's initiatives, the project still needed official approval and to be integrated into the university framework. By presenting the Solovetsky Monastery expedition as a summer vacation construction brigade, or Stroyotryad, coordinated by the Komsomol, the students were able to give their volunteer work a sanctioned and recognized organizational form. Actually, there are many fascinating things in what I study, but this one is absolutely just mesmerizing. Just think about it for a second. These guys wanted to restore perhaps the most famous Orthodox monastery in the country, a place that had also been one of the most notorious Gulag camps. What could be more absurd than that? And yet, these initiatives ended up by taking the shape of the probably most quintessentially Soviet institution of that era, the construction brigade, the Stroyotryad. They simply said, it's not an expedition to save a monastery anymore, it's a Stroyotryad. And it worked out. The success of this approach was made possible by the broader culture of students through Otriady at the Moscow State University Faculty of Physics, which had begun to develop in 1959. These fact students enjoyed slightly more freedom, as I said, than the average Soviet citizens, and were accustomed to self-organization and cooperation. By that time, the Khrushchev administration had been trying for several years to involve students in the Virgin Lands campaign. Major mid-1950s initiatives aimed at cultivating previously unused lands in Kazakhstan and Siberia to boost agricultural production. But these efforts had failed to achieve the desired results. In response, physics students formed their own brigades and demonstrated exceptional efficiency, giving impetus to a large-scale movement that would soon sweep across the entire Soviet Union. In the early years, they operated without official recognition, but in 1962, Khrushchev publicly endorsed the movement. Ideological orthodoxy, hard work, and collectivism, which characterized the brigade, were only possible so long as they maintained a measured distance from political bureaucracies and adult authority structures. As a popular стройотряд song went, у студентов есть своя планета, это целина. Students have their own planet, it is the Virgin Lands. By the late 1960s, about 10 years after the very first brigade had been sent out, the student brigade system had reached the peak of its popularity and scale. Всеволод Tverdislav, who was approached by the Rodina students, was an active participant in the student construction brigade movement, and notably a member of the very first FISFAC construction detachment in 1959. Which is widely considered to have marked the beginning of the whole Stroyotryady movement. Nevertheless, organizing the restoration expedition was not straightforward. Tverdislav had to navigate a chain of formal and informal approvals from university administration and justify the initiatives to Komsomol management as well as Stroyotryad committees. To succeed, he embarked on a careful diplomatic campaign presenting the exhibition as aligned with Soviet ideological goals. In conversation with me, Tverdislav tends to downplay the significance of the Rodina Club members who reached him out, while overestimating both his own role and the degree of resistance from party cells. Yet, he's undeniably right in insisting that the initiatives became viable only thanks to Komsomol, which already possessed a well-developed infrastructure for organizing traveling brigades. Unlike the Komsomol, the Rodina Club had virtually no experience in organizing large-scale expeditions, where off-site activities rarely extended beyond day trips from Moscow or short excursions to nearby historic towns. With Komsomol's support, the Solovki restoration project gained access to the organization capacity and logistical resources necessary to operate at a scale that Rodina students could never have achieved on their own. But Rodina was much more than that. The students didn't just bring their fascination with ancient Russian art and culture, the focus of the club activities at that point. They also brought a belief that an independent student organization could actually get things done, and crucially, they brought their connections to Rodina Informal Board, a network of Russophile intellectuals and heritage activism linked to major institutions like the Ministry of Culture, the Komsomol, and WOPIC. These connections gave the students not only intellectual support and professional expertise, but also access to resources and to the right bureaucratic channels. In other words, they helped turn student enthusiasm into real institutional backing. Securing the Komsomol's endorsement was only the first step in organizing what was a large-scale enterprise involving students. To bring the Solovki initiative to life, approval from university authorities was equally crucial, both for bureaucratic and economic reasons. The Komsomol lacked the funds to cover the considerable travel expenses to the remote islands, while the local authorities with whom the students were in touch could offer little more than accommodation and work guidance. Unlike standard construction brigades, the Solovki Restoration Detachment had no prospect of earning wages for its work and thus required direct financial support. After several unsuccessful rounds of negotiation, support finally came from the very top of the university hierarchy, Ivan Petrovsky, the rector of Moscow State University, and a distinguished mathematician, personally endorsed the initiatives. His backing cut through the early resistance and ensured that the expedition would go ahead. Ivan Petrovsky was a prominent figure in the Soviet academic world, particularly during the post-Stalin era and throughout the 1960s. Petrovsky held several key positions during World War II. He served as a dean of Faculty of Mechanics and Mathematics at Moscow State University. In 1951, he became the university rector, a post he retained until his death in 1973. As the rector, he played a pivotal role in shaping the university post-Stalin development and renewal of its academic program. In addition to his university responsibilities, Petrovsky was a member of the Presidium of the USSR Academy of Sciences and the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, the body that formally represented the highest state authority in the Soviet Union. As an influential figure within the University Komsomol, Vsevolod Tverdislav had direct access to the rectorate. He told me, for example, that Petrovsky had personally assisted him obtaining rare foreign journals. So, Petrovsky's decision to support the Solovki Restoration Initiative did not come out of nowhere. It aligned with his long-standing habit of backing student self-organization and independent intellectual activities. Already in 1954, for instance, he had sided with the FISFAC students when they protested against their own administration. And throughout his tenure, Petrovsky constantly showed support for physicists at their faculty. Moreover, Ivan Petrovsky belonged to a group of high-ranking individuals advocating for the protection of architectural heritage at the highest level, to the heritage lobby. As early as 1956, he signed an open letter calling for stronger measures to protect heritage, including the establishment of a specialized administrative body and a nationwide voluntary society whose members could assist in the preservation of cultural heritage. I will quote it. Millions of Soviet citizens who cared deeply about the fate of their native culture are experiencing deep emotional distress. Immediate action is needed. Across the entire country, the destruction of heritage sites is proceeding incomparably faster than their restoration. Despite the partial liberalization of Soviet society during the fall, these appeals met resistance at the very top. Khrushchev himself, who held a generally anti-religious outlook and disliked the idea of allocating more state funds to the restoration of monuments, was firmly opposed. As a result, in the 1950s, the attempt to establish a formal organization for heritage protection ultimately failed. But by the 1960s, the atmosphere had changed. The advocacy for cultural heritage didn't disappear, it simply shifted into the new institutional forms. One of the key platforms became the section on monuments and museums within the Soviet Committee for the Protection of Peace, which was created in 1916. Petrovsky joined this section alongside many future patrons and supporters of the Rodina Club, people like Pyotr Baranovsky, the club's own ideologue, as well as Glazunov, Kanyon, Konkorobov, Korin, Leonov, Saloukin, and Tidmont. And once again, Baranovsky was at the very center of this circle. The Monuments and Museums section of the CKZM collected information on imminent demolitions and the deteriorating state of monuments, participated in discussions on heritage and architecture, promoted preservation in the Soviet press, and lobbied for protection at the state level by submitting proposals to the Central Committee of the party. Ivan Petrovsky was a key figure in this lobby, acting as a crucial link between intellectual, senior party officials and the ministries of education and culture. Petrovsky not only supported the popularizing and restoration work of Moscow State University professors and students, but also probed the soil for the creation of voluntary society for the protection of monuments during his visits to the party's Central Committee in connection with his scientific works. In 1965, Petrovsky, along with Rodin leaders and their supporters, became part of the organizing committee for the establishment of the VOPIG. It seems certain that Ivan Petrovsky was aware of the activities of the Rodin Club members, and it appears that he was both a supporter and a lobbyist for their efforts. In this way, the organizational and managerial capacity of the Faculty of Physics Komsomol was instrumentalized by heritage preservationists from two directions. On one hand, the students involved in the Rodin Club, and on the other, the heritage lobbyists operating from Moscow State University rector Ivan Petrovsky. Both operated within a complex system of networks united by a shared commitment to pre-revolutionary Russian culture. This network of support enabled the club not only to gain institutional backing, but also to mobilize resources for public engagement. A clear example of this was the fundraising concert held in June 1967 at the Moscow State University House of Culture. Petrovsky personal support not only legitimized the students' initiatives, but also provided crucial financial backing. With the funds secured, the practical preparation for the expedition could finally begin. The students were finally ready to embark on Solovki. The detachment had been formed, funding secured, and necessary approvals obtained. The initial idea originated within the Rodina Club, a student group united by an interest in pre-revolutionary Russian culture, already engaged in restoration activities in Moscow and embedded into preservationist and intellectual circles. The proposal then found receptive ground among students at the Moscow State University Physics faculty, known for its distinctive intellectual environment. With the support of the faculty Komsomol committees, the initiative was structured and framed as a stroytriad, a student labor detachment, providing significantly greater managerial capacity and access to resources. This organizational form allowed the project to navigate bureaucratic obstacles and ultimately secure the backing of Moscow State University rector Ivan Petrovsky, himself part of a circle of high-ranking heritage advocates, many closely linked to the Rodina Club. This episode cannot be understood purely as a top-down directive, nor as a purely grassroots initiative. Rather, it exemplifies a convergence in which students, administrators, and cultural advocates collectively negotiated and, in effect, reshaped Soviet institutional frameworks to pursue a shared engagement with pre-revolutionary Russian culture. While students provided the principal energy and drive, their activities were constantly supported, guided, and legitimized by elder figures such as Pyotr Baranovsky and Ivan Petrovsky. The Solovki initiative succeeded. The student activities were acclaimed by the Soviet press and received support from both the VPIG and the Komsomol. What had begun as a venture grounded in student enthusiasm and backed by the faculty Komsomol rapidly expanded in both scope and reach. The following year, 7 more restoration brigades were organized. Solovki, Kizhi Kirillov-Belozersky Monastery, Key Island, the Griboyedov Estate in the Smolensk regions, Arkhis, and the Passé Fragile Monastery in Suzdal. In September 1968, on behalf of the headquarters of Student Restoration and Construction Brigades in the Moscow City Komsomol Committee and the youth section of the VOPIG Central Council, an appeal was published addressing Soviet students. I quote, as it eloquently illustrates with outward dynamics from Moscow to the regions. In every region, territory, and republic, in large cities and remote areas alike, were priceless monuments of history and culture, monuments of the revolution and the patriotic war. It's our direct duty to help restore and preserve these monuments, for they embody the philosophy of history, the noble spirit of our people, who stood steadfast in defense of their frontiers during the wars and adorned their native land with their labor in times of peace. Therefore, we call upon all students to support the initiatives of Muscovites to establish local restoration teams with the assistance of Komsomol committees and branches of the Society for the Protection of Monuments. This patriotic task is within our capabilities. We are obliged to preserve for future generations the greater treasures of culture and history that inseparably connect the past, present, and the future of our country. Oh, sorry, I forgot about the slide. Yeah. Beginning in 1969, the campaign expanded in a nationwide movement, with Restoration Brigade formed across a wide area of the RSFSR and extended into the Ukrainian SSSR as well, in Arkhangelsk, Smolensk, Volgograd, Irkutsk, Krasnoyarsk, Kurgan, Nalchik, Novgorod, Penza, Murmansk, Ryazan, Kyiv, Sverdlovsk, and Yaroslavl. Between 1967 and 1977, Moscow-based student brigades alone carried out restoration work worth nearly 4 million rubles. In 1977 alone, the value of their completed work reached 660,000 rubles. A similar trajectory marked the professionalization of these brigades. Even Komsomolskaya Pravda acknowledged that during the first Solovki brigade, none of the participants possessed professional skills. In subsequent years, the PIK organized training programs in Moscow, while the skills acquired were passed down and consolidated within the brigades themselves. In the 1970s and 1980s, students were frequently assigned highly complex and professional tasks. This attests not only to the material scale of the enterprise, but also to its institutional maturation. What had begun as an extracurricular activity for these fact students evolved into a structured, semi-professional system of monument preservation, becoming a significant auxiliary pillar of the state heritage preservation apparatus. Yeah, I'm coming to the restoration brigades enjoyed a particular reputation within the wider student construction brigade movement. While we remained in the shadow of a flagship Stroyotryady working on projects directly related to economic development, restoration participants could count on tangible the restoration brigades carried an aura of exclusivity and intellectual romance, and were widely regarded as a more engaging and meaningful. Joining an expedition was become a choice for those who saw themselves as different, as belonging to a distinct milieu of the curious and the committed, and as was no less important, engaged in important work for the preservation of Russian history. Gradually, interest in heritage preservation started to spread beyond university and the technical intellectual communities. The restoration brigades that already existed had their limits. They were tied to institutions and could only recruit students or people connected to university. As a result, the movement began to outgrow the framework set up by the Komsomol-Volpik Alliance in the late 1960s. By the early 1980s, fully independent restoration groups were starting to appear. They operated outside the university system, but they built on the networks, knowledge, and practices developed by the early student brigades. As early as 1971, again thanks to tireless Piotr Baranovsky, a new initiative emerged in Moscow, the Общественная комиссия по шефству, Public Supervisory Commission. It replaced the disbanded Rodina Club. This group of volunteers worked on a regular basis to assist Baranovsky on restoring the Krutitskaya Podvorye and several other monuments. By 1981, the commission received official recognition and became part of the Moscow branch of Volpik. The Shevskaya Движение, or the supervisory movement, began to expand rapidly. Participation was no longer restricted to students. Volunteers of all ages and professional backgrounds could join it, learning about the events through word of mouth or newspaper notice. In 1984, a proposal was put forward to expand the Moscow Volpik supervisory system across Soviet Russia. This created an institutional framework for grassroots volunteer participation in restoration work, an outlet for civic engagement that had long been in demand. I think I will skip this and go to the
minutes only you have, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm running out of time. Sorry, but I think that's it's fine. I'm going to my conclusion. Yeah, the last episode about the Supervisor Brigade. In 1987, the Russian Council of Supervisor Brigades was established under the Central Committee of WOPIG, marking the formal consolidation of the supervisory movement in the Union. All Russian and all Union meetings of this association were held in 1987 and in 1988. At the second meeting, 25 clubs from 22 cities and regions were represented, highlighting the movement's wide geographic reach. Yeah, going to, okay. Yeah, I think it's okay. Going to the conclusion. So by tracing the emergence and development of student-led restoration initiatives from the Rodina Club in 1965 and the Solovki expedition in 1967 to the broader student restoration movement of the 1970s and then the supervisory brigades movement in the 1980s, this paper has sought to eliminate the social foundation of late Soviet heritage voluntarism, as well as to highlight its expansion beyond Moscow. The narrowing of opportunities for heritage activism in Moscow eventually gave rise to a large-scale movement dedicated to the restoration of remote monuments and then coming back to Moscow. A particularly important role in this outward movement from Moscow was played by the youth. Youth heritage initiatives were deeply embedded within official institutions, the Komsomol, university, construction brigades, and VOPIG, but they also transformed these structures from within, turning them into channels for civic engagement and voluntary action. The restoration brigades thus offer a compelling example of how Soviet institutions could enable rather than suppress forms of civic engagement. While aligning with the state's cultural policy and operating within the frameworks of Soviet heritage discourse and ideology, these projects simultaneously opened new spaces for agency and participation. Retrospective and nostalgic sensibilities coexisted with patriotic and future-oriented aspirations, forming a distinctive moral economy of late socialism, in which institutional and ideological loyalty and creative reinterpretation were not contradictory, but mutually reinforcing. Rather than subverting the system, student initiatives exemplified a mode of adaptation and renewal, repurposing official bureaucratic and ideological framework in the long run. Yeah, I think that's good for now. Sorry for being too long. Yeah, thank you so much for your attention, and I'll be glad to discuss your question later with Boris.
Okay, thanks for both presenters. I wanted to ask Boris questions. Yeah, thank you so much for an insight into what's happening now in Russia. I just wondered, do you think, what would you say about the political potential of this sort of movement or activism? Because just as an example, there was a recently some sort of analytical paper on the civic civic society in Russia, and it said there that the activism of protecting animals, like pet activism, is one of the most basically what's the word for it, like most popular now. So this is something that's able to unite people, and oh, sorry, my camera is yeah. So it's something that's able to unite people, and it gives, but it's strongly apolitical. So, but it's nevertheless really popular. So, what would you say about this Новое краеведение? Is this kind of, does it have political potential?
Thank you very much for the question, and I think it's rather difficult to comment, but I can mention the studies of the Ekaterina Melnikova, recent studies, who considers that today the preservation movement became particularly apolitical, but I think that my example shows that we have some initiatives which preserve not only some heritage objects, but also such an impulse, such an activist impulse. And I think that this initiative is in contradiction with the whole atmosphere in the particular local studies and local studies initiatives, because we understand that, for example, it's not possible to make such work, for example, for the members of the Moscow Museum or the other institutions, but also I think that it's not possible or not very convenient for other bloggers and other public persons who elaborates this local studies agenda. So, if I think it's what I can say.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentations. It was very interesting, especially for me, because just this summer I participated in 4 restoration projects in Europe, by the European Heritage Volunteers Organization, which started in right before unification of Germany, also as a activism of the students, and the idea of this organization, as far as I can understand, was, and it's still, to preserve the quite abandoned cultural heritage, possibly without the state support. So to preserve the abandoned cultural heritage in order to protect the heritage of local communities, the history of the local communities, either when the famous local sites and even just any sites in big cities, because the sites in big cities might be the picture of the state, the picture of state narratives. So do you think it is relevant in Russian case now? Because I remember that the discussions about Moscow, that any positive initiatives in Moscow is the opportunity for propaganda to use it later on. So do you think there is some contradiction between this preservation of heritage in small cities and in big cities?
It's a question for me, yes.
For both.
So I don't know. Maybe Alexey will begin, and then I can continue.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's an ambivalent process, I'd say, because I mean, of course, when it started in late Soviet Russia, when it started due to the ideological constraints in Moscow. So I think the emergence of the movement was in Moscow, and we were mostly interested in working with the monuments in Moscow, but it became very difficult to work in the highly ideologized atmosphere in Moscow, and that's why it's swept around across the country, and it starts with outward direction started. But of course, it just, I mean, maybe it's the main line, but of course there are many other student society which were inspired by the experience of Moscow students in our local communities. Yeah, unfortunately, I skipped this part, which was in the end of my presentation, but yeah, in 1980s, from 1970s to 1980s, there were many local student communities which wanted to preserve their local heritage. And of course, for them, it was another task. So they wanted to conserve what is much more difficult to conserve, because I mean, in Moscow, it's still, I mean, it was bad, but in comparison to the heritage in regions, it was excellent. So, of course, yeah, I would say there are two directions. Am I right in understanding your question?
And I can maybe add something to what Alexey have said. So I think that yes, and I think that the situation also actual now because we know some initiatives which which um, mm, concerned with the trips to the towns, for example, in province, and to some activities with the preservation of the objects in province. And on the other hand, we have, I think, some interesting initiatives now. Some interesting initiatives in. Yes, in Russian regions, which are which really do work for preservation, and we can remind that Tom Sawyer first began not in the capital but also in the province. So I think that there is a potential in these regional centers for the preservation initiatives also.
Thank you.
Yeah, I could add just a sentence. Yeah, and in the current context, I agree that there is. As I understand, of course, there is so from on the one hand, there is many people going from Moscow to the regions because the climate in Moscow is no longer possible to persist. But at the same time, of course, there are hundreds, thousands of local initiatives which are focused on their heritage, and for them, it sounds completely differently, but then with two lines meet each other.
Thank you. Times for Anna's question and then Alexander's.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for these interesting presentations. I have two questions. The first for Boris. I'm curious about the sources that the organization use, because in my understanding, that's everything that's related to Gulag history and especially like NKVD leads us to NKVD archives. So, and I'm curious, what is it? And because it looks like a I don't know, like a local initiatives, like a grassroots, but at the same time, we know that it's very like pretty hard to get to archive and get this information. So do you know something about this, whether they use the materials and how? So this is the first clarifying question about the sources. And my second question to Alexey, and this is about, this is interesting, you know, during your presentation, I actually checked the website of Solovki, and, you know, I couldn't find any information about this Stroyatriad activity. However, I saw the name of Pyotr Baranovsky, who saved actually icons at the beginning when the only Sloan was established there. So and that is my question. And I understand that the website now is led by Russian Orthodox Church. So my question is, in your presentation, you mentioned that it was inspired by, for example, like a Russophile intelligentsia. I know a bit about Russian Catacombs Church, and so there were also activists who collected memoirs about Sloan, about Solovki, about Russian churches. And they also actually, for example, these new martyrs, the people who were killed, persecuted for their faith during the Soviet Union. This information was preserved and collected by these, let's say, Russian catacomb church activists. Do you know whether they connected? Did they know each other? Do you know something about this? And yeah, is it correct that this restoration work was never hasn't been acknowledged by Solovki, by Russian Orthodox Church, maybe a Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, but just unbelievable. I have never heard about this, and thank you for for making this information available. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, and it seems to me that it's really a rather difficult question, and I can share with you what I know. So the problem is that there are the problem is that the archive of the Dmitlag was was destroyed, and it doesn't existed. So maybe the Andrei Dvornikov, maybe he works with some documents, and he announced some archival some archival sources which he found, but I think that maybe it concerns, for example, biographies of the persons whom he spoke about. I also think that he used that the constructing documentation and some documents, some technical documents. But when I discuss this project with my colleagues who study this history of repressions, they were rather skeptical about the informational significance of their work. And for example, they valued and they praised the work of the authors of the Moscow Volga initiative, Sergei Gaev, Igor Kuvrakov, and they were rather skeptical about the basis of this Забытые моряки project, and we also have some results of the project. It's right here. Это прямо здесь by Memorial Society, and think that they also use everything that they can find in the internet on some other places, and also they based on the interaction with the residents of this area, this district, and other places who are interested in this topic and who can tell some stories, some personal stories about this. So this is what I know about the basis, but as I said, it's really difficult to verify because there are not clear references to some sources, and so I don't know. We don't know. We know some works. For example, there were the book of Barkovsky, who wrote about Bitlag, and his famous book, one of the main sources on this topic. But the other references are difficult to find in these products, and this is films, not the academic production. So the situation is like this.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments and questions. I'll start with the simplest one for me about Piotr Baranovsky. And it's actually right, and it's very important that Baranovsky worked on Solovki in 1920s. And yeah, then he inspired students to go to Solovki for the second time in the 1960s. And actually, it's very interesting because Piotr Baranovsky was like a connecting thread for all these initiatives. And he's the person just behind the whole restoration movement in the 20th century. So yeah, he started to work, so he did something in Solovki, on Solovki in the 1920s, and then he inspired students to go where in the 1960s. And it's just one case, but there are many cases like that, where the importance and significance of Piotr Baranovsky is essential. Yeah, and it's actually very weird that there's still no biography of Piotr Baranovsky, who was probably one of the most influential uh, cultural ideologues in Soviet Russia. Yeah, it's the first question. The second one, I'll pick about the question about Russian catacomb church. Unfortunately, I don't know. I don't know about the connections. Yeah, I didn't delve into it. And the last question, which is super interesting to me, is about actually the Solovki website. There is no mention of the construction brigade because there is a conflict between students and the Orthodox monastery. So the brigade, they started to work in 1967 and they worked till 2022. So it's quite a significant project. And the history of with Restoration Brigade is, of course, the essential part of the contemporary history of the Solovki monastery, but it hasn't been ever acknowledged by the monastery. So, and monastery wanted to get rid of students because, of course, so their values started to contradict in the 1990s and most prominently in the 2000s. Yeah, so the monastery wanted to erase the traces of the brigade with different methods, not all of them really normal. I'd say, yeah, but that's true. So, and another topic which is raised by your question is actually the memory about the construction brigades, about the restoration construction brigades. There is no memory about this movement, and this is very important. So this is an essential part of corporate identities for these people who are, many of them are still alive, of course. But there is no any official or just institutional kind of acknowledgement of their work, of construction brigade, of stroyotryady, or the work of restoration construction brigade. And the movement was huge. But yeah, nothing is written, nothing is acknowledged, and it's very traumatic for these people who worked. I mean, many of them. I have a respondent who worked on Solovki from 1975 till 2020. And of course, for him, it's a traumatic experience that there no evidence of his work. No one was grateful.
Thanks so much. We've got 10 minutes left, so let's make the questions shorter, sharper. Alexander?
Okay, I will try to ask my questions very quickly. With them, I'll try. I wanted to try to make some bridge between two presentations. So, the question for Boris, so this group, Забытые моряки, themselves, what do they think, or what do you think about continuity between them and so let's Soviet generations of local history? Is it really this gap between this generation or some kind of continuity, not only for observation, but as same for themselves? And the question for Alexey is related to this. Your informants, your respondents in your oral history project. I understand that it wasn't your main topic and that wasn't a question, but what do you see, what have you seen? Some later projects or some continuing projects or some nowadays projects of heritage preservations or conservations or local history, do they consider this as some kind of prolongation of continuation of their work, or if someone of them is still interested in this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll try to be short in my answer. So I mentioned in my presentation the Tsaritsына case, and there was Sergei Chusov, who in 1980s was one of who was a member of such Stroyotrяд, which and worked in the Tsaritsына and in the Simonov Monastery, and they gave this Stroyotrяд the name of Petr Baranovsky, and then he became one of he became author of this local study project and made a site and so on. So here we can see the continuity, and in the case of Забытые моряки, we didn't see something like this. But they have they made references to the Baranovsky, and for them he is one of the main figures, if not the dominant figure in this field of the preservation and field of preservation. Yes.
Yeah, the first part of my answer is actually the same. The figure of Sergei Chusov is also important for me because Sergei Chusov was a member of Supervisory Brigade movement as well in the 1980s. So with us here the connection. Another example are most of the NGOs. Foundations working with the heritage nowadays in the north, like Вереница, Общее дело, Restavras. All of them have their roots in WIS movement, in the Supervisory Brigades movement in the 1980s. Of course, it drastically changed, so most of them are now very religious, but it started in the 1980s, and for instance, the leading figure in the supervisory movement was Anatoly Ptitsin, and yeah, he was very religious, Orthodox even in the 1980s, and now he's a very important figure in Общее дело and in Вереница. So yeah, here is the connection.
Thank you. Alexey had a question as well.
Hello. Hi, Boris. Good to see you. I have a question for you and for Alexey,
Okay.
but I'll be short. Boris, I'm curious, what does the concept of neoliberal add to your analysis? Because you're speaking about Moscow these days, and it is the city where the state invests massively, right? Both in its, public infrastructure, but also its in cultural and memory infrastructure. Neoliberalism is about the withdrawal of the state from, the economy, from the public spaces, from all those things. So, and in some ways, one could argue that your activists are the ones who are more neoliberal than the Russian state and Moscow in this sense. So I'm wondering, why do you need this term, and do you need it at all? And for Alexey, I was curious that Irina Sandemirskaya's book was completely kind of absent in your analysis, because without Sandemirskaya, it looks like you have these volunteers who, these benevolent guys who go out of Moscow to the provinces and, help these kind of local people who abandon their heritage and don't know what to do without it. Sandemirskaya shows that, there is a lot to kind of наследие and насилие outside of the alliteration and their kind of names, right? So is there a way to add violence, to add kind of that aspect to your analysis? Because without it, one kind of is curious why all these people, travel there just, to do public good.
Thank you very much, and also glad to see you here. So I'm based upon the studies on the development of urban culture in Moscow, and so for some reasons they seem quite concise, but I said and I mentioned that this definition is debatable, and I know that there is a critique to the and there is a discussion on this term, and some scholars criticize this use of this term, and mention that we really here we can really hear see the expansion of the state, and everything is everything which take place in the state because of the support of the state and so on. But I think that some reason for use of this term can be can be that this authorities and also experts tried in 2010s to promote some experience from the Western from the West, which they took from the West, and so they tried to arrange such a scene for urban life, which have some characteristics of the civilized urban landscape. But of course, and we see the tendencies. So of course now in 2025 we can't ignore that everything which is done is almost everything which is done is on the behalf of the state support. So you are right, but also there are a lot of works which there are a lot of scholars who try to use this term. So it's also the reason for discuss this question. Thank you.
So it's state capitalist. It's not neoliberal then.
Maybe yes. Maybe it's more concise, term. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexey, for your remark and question. Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. I didn't think about the violence as a concept for with research. I was using in a paper, so which with presentation was based, I used terms like cultural colonization and cultural appropriation. Yeah, but actually, so I'm not sure if it's also very useful in this regard, in this case. But I'll read with paragraph, this section from Marina Sandomirska book, which of course is very important for my research. But yeah, I will think about the concept of violence. And as for the motivation, as you mentioned it, I also wanted to demonstrate with dynamic of motivation. So if for first generation of with students coming out of Moscow, it was like curiosity and the feeling of how different and exclusive they are. So for them, it was like an opportunity to underline how special they are. And then it changed in the 1970s and the 1980s. It's completely different, and we speak, as for the 80s, we speak about the search for authenticity, the sort of religious search. So it's also students, but of course the motivations changed.
Thank you. No more questions. So let's write 7:30. Thank you to everybody for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time in February.
Thank you. Bye, and see you.